everything that I thought it would be, it pretty much wasn't. It was like a really big high and then a really big crash, like a really big low after that.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social Podcast. Today we're here with a special episode, our rider interviews return, and today I am joined with our first guest of the season, Kaitie Keough, who announced her retirement just a week ago. Kaitie, welcome on the podcast.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
Could you maybe introduce yourself short to our listeners?
Yes, my name is Kaitie Keough. I'm from the United States of America, and I race cyclocross for the past 12 years with CannondaleCyclocrossWorld.com.
Recently you announced your retirement, but first let's take a look back on a quite impressive career. How did you start cycling?
I started cycling when I was 7 years old on the velodrome in Kenosha, Wisconsin. That was the town just over from where I grew up. And they had a Monday night stock bike racing where you could just take your neighborhood bike and do like 2-lap race twice during the night. So I started doing that. And then when I was 10 years old, I was old enough to go on the real track bike. So then I started racing on Tuesday nights on the velodrome. And just through meeting people doing that, we found that there were other disciplines in cycling, like road and cyclocross. So then my parents started taking me to some road races and cyclocross races. And yeah, that's basically how I got into it.
Were there any role models when you started cycling that you looked up to or that motivated you?
Growing up, Erin Marabella, she raced on the track. I believe she did the Olympics in Athens. She's from the same town I grew up in, so she was kind of my first role model in terms of like a woman who competes at a high level. And then, of course, as I got further along in the sport, I knew of more top women and kind of looked up to them, but I would say she was the first one. Yeah, and Katarina Nash has always been a big role model of mine as well for just everything she does on and off the bike. So
yeah, she also had an impressive career and still racing, got a top 10 in Fayetteville, which is very impressive at the age she has now.
Yes.
You mentioned that you started racing these youth races. How was that in the United States? Here in the Netherlands and Belgium, we're used to having youth races every week in every small town or village, but I can imagine that being very different in such a large country as the United States.
Yes, I think every state has their own like cycling association, so they'll have their own like local race scene, but still it's quite a bit of a drive every time you want to do it. Like I think the shortest drive we would do for some cyclocross and road races was maybe like 30 minutes to up to 2 hours. So it's kind of spread all over the state, but there are races every weekend in all disciplines if you wish to do them. So yeah.
And then you basically developed, and when you became a junior, obviously the development of the women's part of the sport has taken a lot of time. There were no dedicated junior races that we can see now, also no dedicated under 23 races. So how was that for you when you started racing UCI races but immediately needed to be up against the big guns?
Yes, thankfully, when I was racing junior category, I was able to compete in the Junior World Championships for the road, and that was really cool because it kind of gave me a taste of like the biggest competition there is in cycling aside from the Olympics, and I got to compete in it with competitors my age. So that was a special feeling. And I think that same feeling transfers over to like the elite category. It's still world championships and you get to compete at the highest level. But with cyclocross, I quickly found that was my favorite discipline and the one that I found that I was the best at as well. So I really enjoyed doing that. And I never really thought anything about like there not being a junior U23 category just because there wasn't. So but I was honestly a little bummed. I think shortly after I graduated out of U23 category, they did come out with the first U23 World. So that was a little bit of a bummer because that would have been a really cool thing to participate in and to compete in. But I'm glad that they have that now. It's definitely great that it's progressed, and there's so many great junior women and U23 women coming through the ranks, and even some of them in the U23 category are at the top of the elite ranks right now. So it's really fun to watch just the development and the way the sport is progressing. But yeah, I mean, that's just the card I was dealt in the age that I wasn't fortunate enough to be able to compete in those junior U23 categories, but I'm glad that they have them now. Yeah.
So you were racing with the elites, mainly in USA, and I think a bit in Canada as well. How were those races for you?
Yeah, so I was always with the elite, and sometimes some of the races would separate like a U23 podium. So that was kind of nice. Sometimes I'd get to go up there, but I think being able to race with the elite definitely pushed me to be better, and it was harder to have success early on because I was racing against women a lot older than me and a lot more experienced. But I definitely think it played a big role in helping me to learn what it takes to be the best that I can be, and to be able to compete at a high level. And it just made me push harder and try harder, and it was definitely fun to be able to race against women older than me and women that I looked up to. So.
And then ultimately you started coming to Europe for races. When was the first time that you were able to come over to Europe, and how was that for you?
Yes, the first time I came to Europe to compete for cyclocross was in Hoogerheide 2011. We did the Hoogerheide World Cup before the St. Wendel Worlds in Germany, and I was like a deer in headlights, basically. I had no clue what was going on. I think both races I finished in the 30s placing wise, but I was just a sponge and soaking up everything that I could. And of course the races were brutally hard, but again, I was just there to learn and get experience. And yes, I was competing, but again, deer in headlights, no clue what's going on. So different from anything that I've ever competed in a cyclocross race in the United States, just with the crowds and the venue and the racers. The fields are so much deeper and everything. So that was quite an experience, and definitely one that I'll remember for the rest of my life, and something that I'm very glad that I got to the opportunity to do at such a young age, because I think I was 18, almost 19 years old at that point. So yeah.
And what goals did you have for yourself for the future? Did you have any expectations or thing that you wanted to achieve, or were you really in there to enjoy the sport and see where you could come eventually?
At that time, no, I don't think I had any super specific goals within the sport. I think I was just very grateful to have the opportunity to be a member of the Cannondale Cyclocross World Team. I was surrounded by 3 men in the sport that were at the top of their game in the United States. And I was just eager and happy that I had the chance to learn as much as I could from them. And as I got older, I was just, progressing and seeing my only real goal was to just see how far I could take it. And as I got older and started to achieve some more success, then my goals became a little clearer. But off the bat, to start, I didn't have any very clear outcome goals. No.
What would you then consider to be your breakthrough season, or maybe even a breakthrough performance, dedicated to one race?
Yes, I would say in 2015, I finished second on the podium in the Falconburg World Cup, and I would say that was my breakthrough performance. Up until then, I think my best performance was a top 10 or maybe a 10th or 9th, like in Tabor World Cup or Namur World Cup. But until then, I hadn't had any like top fives or anything. So that second place in Falconburg was a really big deal and kind of surprised myself and was like, whoa, I think I can, be kind of good at this. And it was super, super fun to finish well on that course. And that ended up being one of my favorites on the circuit for a long time. So I would say that was my breakthrough performance.
Well, I have to admit, I'm a bit surprised by that because, of course, you already ended 10th in the Louisville World Championship. How did you feel about that?
Top 10 in Louisville was great. I mean, top 10 in the world is super great, especially on home soil. But I think I would say the Valkenburg World Cup has to take the card on that one, just because, again, it's a World Cup in Europe, which is so much different than competing in a World Cup at home. And it's a podium. It's like a top 10. So, or I mean, a top 3, right? So I would say, yeah, that trumps the Louisville, even though that's special as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine Louisville being very special considering it's a world championship in your own country with, well, a lot of spectators there supporting the Americans. How was that race for you?
That was super special. It was really a unique experience, and in my case, a once in a lifetime experience. So I'm very grateful that I had the opportunity to compete in the world championships on home soil and in front of all my family and friends, just not very 6 hours from where I grew up. So that was definitely a super special time and opportunity in my cycling career.
And then if we go then to that performance you just mentioned, the podium in the World Cup in Falconburg, there's also a bit of a switch going on there. You mainly focused on the racing in the USA, and then you were able to come to Europe a bit more. How does that compare, racing in the USA and also the logistics that it brings with it?
Yeah, thankfully I had such great support on the program that I was a part of with Cannondale Cyclocross World. And they had a really good system dialed with like how we traveled to Europe, where we stayed, our support while we were over there. Like really, really that was dialed in. And the riders on the team didn't really have to think or worry about anything except just riding their bike and racing. So that I was really fortunate with that, because it took a lot of stress and energy away from having to deal with that. So that was super nice. And just them being able to give me the support and allow me to go to Europe and see how far I could go there and race against the best in the world was a really big deal. And allowing me to do that from such a young age and pretty early on with my time in the team was a big deal too, because I got to get my feet wet as soon as possible. So that was a big deal, I think, in my development and my progression in the sport. And racing in Europe, I think across all disciplines, it's just cycling in Europe is so mainstream that it's followed. You guys have spectators that come and watch and have their favorite riders, and they're not, yes, they may cycle on the weekends or something, but most of the time I think the majority of your spectators aren't racers themselves. And that's the biggest thing between America and Europe is our spectators at the races are individuals who are also racing. We don't have, I mean, there may be like a few people who don't ride at all that will come watch, but that's very rare. And so just the magnitude of what cycling is in Europe is at first can be very intimidating, like when you go over there, because you're like, wait a second, and am I at like an NFL football game here? There are so many people, and the venue is just like massive, and there's people everywhere, and the announcing and the TV and the cameras and all that stuff. So it's just, it kind of takes your breath away and can be an intimidating environment when you first go over there, and takes maybe like a handful of races to just get used to navigating the venue and stuff like that, because it's just all on such a bigger scale.
I can only imagine that the World Championships that year in Zolder must have been amazing as well, because I think on the Saturday there were like 45,000 spectators there.
Yeah, that's insane. again, that's like that's like an NFL football game in America or something, like that's big time. So it's just super cool that I was able to be a part of that and get to be out there racing, and that's definitely something I never took for granted, and always realized that it was something super special. So yeah.
You got another top 10 there at the World Championships. Were you then having any goals for yourself, like for the future, like maybe wanting to get a top 5 or anything?
Yeah, so around that Zolder time, I definitely started to want to have more success at the international level, the higher level, and I think around that time also I started to look ahead and be like, okay, what courses are coming up for world championships that I could maybe try to get top 5 and eventually maybe top 3, that are well suited to me and that can be maybe be a little bit more realistic of a goal looking forward. So yeah, around that time my mentality started to shift on, okay, from how, let's just see how far I can take it, to a little bit more specific outcome goals, definitely.
Yeah, the season after that, you continued to travel between the States and Europe for racing. What's your favorite course that you've raced throughout those seasons, in maybe in Europe or in the USA?
So in Europe, my favorite course was always Namur. That, I think that was my first top 10 World Cup. I finished 10th. I don't remember what year, but that was always my favorite one just because the conditions were always pretty muddy, and if not super muddy, it was at least like slippery. I think there was only one year that I did it that it was dry, but still, super cold. But Namur in Europe is my favorite course. And then in the United States, I'd have to say my favorite course is Jinglecross, just because it's challenging and has a little bit of everything. And I think it's the hardest course that we race on in the States. So that was always my favorite one as well.
Speaking about the Jinglecross, we just had the USA rounds of the World Cup, 3 of them including that Jinglecross. As per usual, we had a lot of complaints from Belgium and European riders about the cost, time, and effort that it takes them. How do you feel about that? Because you've made the cross over the ocean plenty of times within a season, actually, throughout your career.
uh, yeah, I mean, we always kind of laugh about it. But again, the sport is so mainstream there. So if we want to race, if Americans want to race at the high level, we have to go there. We don't really have a choice. But then if you want to have a World Cup, if you want to have a true World Cup series, all the races just can't be in like Belgium and the Netherlands, right? So I think this past September and October, it was so awesome to see almost everyone come over, both on the men's and women's side. I think the men were missing a couple top guns, but they had come over before. So, that's great. And on the women's side, it was so awesome to see. I think it was the most stacked field it's ever been on the women's side, except for 2018. So like having Denise Betsema come and Lucinda Brand, like that was huge. So yeah, I think it's a little funny just because, yes, traveling is hard, but like if you want a true World Cup season, you have to go somewhere other than where you live. So yes, you just have to figure it out and figure out the jet lag and figure out what works best for you on how many days or weeks you arrive before, and just make the most of it, because that's the schedule, I guess, right?
Yeah, I guess that's definitely the case. If we look at the 2017-2018 season for you, you got a handful of World Cup podiums there, and you also went 6th at the World Championships. Do you think that that was your most successful season in terms of consistent performances?
Yes, 2017-18 season was definitely my most consistent season and my best season, one that I'll remember forever. Definitely was super hard and taxing mentally and physically. I think I traveled back and forth a lot that season because I did the entire World Cup season. The first 2 that we did in the US went really well, so then we decided to try to do the whole thing and see how it went. And I ended up finishing 2nd overall in the World Cup series. So that paid off, but it was definitely the best, but also the hardest, just mentally and physically, to like stay healthy and to keep my head in the game and to have everything go right, racing and training wise. That's a lot to ask, and you need a bit of luck on your side too. So yeah, that was definitely a big reward at the end. And I had my family there in Hoogerheide, and that was super special to like have them be able to watch me go on the podium with Sonnekamp and Ava Lechner and get my trophy. And yeah, that was definitely the highlight year of my career. And then I think the Worlds was in Falconburg that year. And yeah, there I definitely was trying for a top 5, missed it just a little bit, but still 6th is a great finish and something I can be proud of, especially after such a long and successful season that I had. So yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that it's not always easy to stay like focused and in the game with your head, especially considering that your family, which is obviously pretty important to everyone, I guess, that they are far away from you, and obviously with the time difference, it isn't easy to stay in contact. How would you say that affected you?
I think the first couple years, that was the hardest part for me, just being over there. I mean, I was with my mechanic and my teammates, but still you just feel a little bit isolated. I wish I could, but we can't speak the language very well or at all. And yes, everyone speaks English, but I still would always feel super embarrassed just because it's like, why do Americans expect everyone else to just be able to speak English, right? That's kind of my mentality on it. But again, it's just different culture, and we don't learn languages like you guys do. So that was always kind of hard, and that always made it feel a bit foreign. Like it never. I think the language thing for me was always the hardest, because at the races everything's almost always announced in Dutch or Flemish, and that was always like the reminder in the background, is like, I am not at home. I am in a different country, a foreign country, and I don't have very many things around me that are familiar, except for my mechanic Gary and maybe a couple teammates if they made the trip as well. So that was the experience the first couple years. Then I got used to it, and it's just like, roll with it. This is how it is, and kind of just accepted that I'm not going to be home for Christmas. I'm not going to be home for Thanksgiving. Like, this is, you make the best of it. And yeah, I got used to it as the time went on, and started to enjoy it more, and got more comfortable being away from my family for longer periods of time. And thank goodness for FaceTime and technology, because that helped a lot. And yeah, you just get in a routine over there as best as you can. So.
Were there perhaps also the pressure that you or other people put upon you that made it tough for you?
There was never really pressure from the team. They only just wanted me to do my best, and they enjoyed to see me do well. And of course, it's fun when you do well, but they were there for me more in the times that it was harder than they probably were for the times where everything went well, right? And I think that says a lot about the program that I was on, because most teams these days, there's always another rider, a better rider, and most riders are replaceable very quickly. So I was super fortunate to be with Stu Thorne and the Cannondale program, because they really saw potential from the beginning, and then developed me and stuck with me. And most of the pressure that I felt always came from myself. Just I'm wanting to be the best that I can, and wanting to do things so well that, yeah, most of the pressure was from myself.
And was that sometimes hard to deal with? I mean, I've ridden races myself, certainly not at the same level, but I certainly know what it feels like if you go to a national championship and then come there aiming for a top 10 or top 15, and then like you crash or you have bad luck or you just don't deliver for yourself. That's not easy to deal with.
No, it's not. And I learned very quickly that most cyclists and most athletes have, the really the best days and the good days are few and far between. So you kind of have to learn quickly that you need to surround yourself with people who will support you and be there to kind of help get you back up and try again and look forward. And I assembled a pretty good team around me to help me with that. And then as I matured and got older, it was easier to keep things in perspective, and the bad days were a little bit easier to let go because you knew you had another race coming up. And I just kind of figured out tools that worked best for me to help manage disappointment and bad days, and let go and look forward, and you had another opportunity to try again. So don't get stuck like thinking about the last race, because at the end of the day you are only as good as your last performance. So you need to learn how to move on and focus forward, kind of thing. So
I mean, we've spoken about some of the hard things to deal with staying in Europe, but I can imagine there's certainly some things you've enjoyed over here besides the racing. Is there anything in terms of culture or food that you really enjoyed about the Netherlands, Belgium, or any other country in Europe which you stayed in?
yes, so 1 year I spent 6 weeks in Europe, but my home base was in Switzerland because my old teammate Christian Hoyle lived there. And so I got to spend the holidays with him and his family and kind of see their Swiss traditions that they do during the holidays. And then otherwise we were always based in Sittard. So during those times, we would mostly just always do like a Christmas dinner in the town square, or this restaurant called Windrock 31 that's just up the hill from our house in Sittard. That was really good. And they had this funny, like, we don't have this in America, but it's this, I don't even know what it's called, but you basically got this menu and you would sit there for hours. Like, I think one time we were there for like 4.5 hours, and you could just keep doing rounds. So you would, in each round, you would pick like 3 different little foods, and they'd bring out the plates, and then you would eat them. And then the next round, you could like pick different things, or if you liked that a certain item, you could pick that again. And we loved it. It was like so cool. Again, we don't have anything like that in America, and that always ended up being our Christmas tradition that we would go. I don't know if that's specific to like the Dutch culture, but it was unique to us, so we loved it. Yeah.
I think this comes closest to the Dutch tradition, which we call gourmetten. It's a tradition with Christmas that a lot of people do it. They invite over friends and family, and everybody has its own small pan. And on the table, there's lots of different sorts of food, and everybody chooses a small piece of this food, puts it into a pan, puts it onto the cooker, which is in the middle of the table, and you just sit and talk. And after 15 minutes, your first small bit of food is ready, and you can sit together, talk while you're preparing your own food.
Yes. No, it was fun. Yeah.
Well, and if we then look to the season after the Falconburg World Championships, you won there your first World Cup. How was that for you? I mean, that has to be the best performance of your career.
Oh, for sure, that's the best performance, especially when I look at like the field that, or the riders that were present that day. Like, I shared the podium with Evie Richards and Marion Voss, and if I had to pick a podium where I was on the top of a World Cup, those two, it's super cool that I got to share that with them. Like, yeah, it's still right now, just talking about it just makes me smile, and it's like super cool. But yeah, for sure, that was the best race and moment of my career, especially as I look back on it now. It was the 3 years that Jinglecross was a World Cup. The first year I finished third, and the next year I finished second, and then in 2018 I finished first. So that trajectory is like, couldn't be any more perfect, right? So that was super cool. And again, on my favorite course in the US, with like the best cyclist of all time standing on the podium with me, is mind-blowing to me still. And everything went perfectly for me on that day, and I couldn't have like planned it any better. And I didn't plan that at all. Actually, I think the week before was Waterloo, and I was super sick. I think I finished like 19th or 20th at that World Cup. So it was definitely like a total shock to me. Wasn't planning on having a good day. I didn't have a great week the week before, and it's just funny because I think sometimes I've noticed throughout my career that the times you kind of let go and don't have super high expectations of myself and don't feel overwhelmed by the pressure that I'm putting on myself have been the times when I've performed the best, and that was definitely one of those days. So that's fun. That was fun. Yeah, that was amazing.
And then the rest of that season, how did that go for you?
Well, basically the next day when I woke up after that World Cup win was like, whoa, like I had dreamed of this for the past couple years of like, wow, what would it feel like to win a World Cup? And then I had this idea in my head of like how it would feel and how I would be after I won that. And everything that I thought it would be, it pretty much wasn't. It was like a really big high and then a really big crash, like a really big low after that. And it took me a while, I think I would say, to like Hoogerheide of that World Cup and then Worlds in Denmark. I think it was basically from Iowa until that Hoogerheide race that it took me a while to get out of that funk, and I managed to turn it around for the last like two races of the season, two or three races of the season, and finish strong. So that was good, but it was definitely a very big learning experience to go through those emotions and figure out like what was that, what was all of that. And no one can really prepare you or teach you to like how you're going to feel after such a big win like that. And especially in the environment I was in, it was all new territory. No one on the Cannondale program had ever won a World Cup or even really been on a World Cup podium. I think Lynn Bissett was like the last one to be on a World Cup podium, and that had been like a while ago on our program. So I was like kind of left to myself to figure out how to navigate that kind of level of riding and then like how you will feel after it. So that was a big learning experience, and it took me a minute to figure it out.
I can definitely imagine that is a very tough situation. You've worked towards that your entire life, and then you're able to take that win on home soil as well. Something that you unfortunately never managed to do at the national championships. Is that something that's maybe still a bit in the back of your head? I really would have wanted to win the national championships, get that Stars and Stripes jersey, because it must be very special.
For sure. Yes, that was like the one thing that I never did. And it's definitely holds weight, and it's definitely like a cool thing to achieve, I think, in any country, right? Especially at the elite level to win an elite national championship. And I was second a handful of times and third a handful of times, but I could never manage to win. And I don't have any regrets in terms of like performances, because I always showed up and gave my best, but it just wasn't meant to be for me. And it's kind of like going back to that question of you grew up racing only elite category. You never had any junior or U23 opportunity in the sport of cyclocross. And it's kind of like I grew up with Kaitie Compton, like having to race Kaitie Compton and having my best years be against her. And so to be second to her is at that time in my career and my fitness level, to be second to her was almost like winning. And unfortunately that sucks because it's not winning. But again, that was just the card I was dealt, and I did try my best on each day throughout the years, but it was not meant to be for me. But I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not easy if you're up against one of the best. I mean, there's
yeah.
plenty of examples of riders who are super talented and outside the national championships get great results, and ultimately at that national championship there's always that one rider or ridester that is just slightly
better. Yep. And I mean, that's the beauty of the nationals, right? Like it needs to come together, and the worlds, like it needs to come together for you on that specific day. And that's super hard, especially when you're racing like the best or one of the best in the world. So yeah.
Yeah, coming off then that 7th place you got at the Worlds in Bogense, you decided to spend the 2019-2020 season fully in Europe after the first World Cups in the USA.
Mm-hmm.
How was that for you? What led to that decision?
Yes, I just felt like I was at a point now where it was either I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, which I was kind of just felt like I was stuck in a rut, like racing in the US and racing in Europe. And so I was like, okay, this isn't a rushed decision. If anything, it's kind of overdue. So we're going to go and move over there to Europe and just base ourselves there the whole time. See what happens when we don't travel back and forth all the time. Do more races over there that I've never done, kind of just embrace it, right? Like just submerge myself into this culture, into the cyclocross, and just see what happens. I crashed and burned. Like the beginning of the season started out okay, and then it just got worse from there. I think my best result that season was 4th in the Bern World Cup, and then I think I got like 4th at Rudevord, maybe 5th in Koppenberg, and then after that it just went all downhill. I think I felt a lot of pressure on myself because my husband was over there for me. My mechanic was over there the whole time for me. The team had spent a lot of money and resources to like send me over there, and they believed in me. And I don't want to say I couldn't handle it. I just felt like a lot of pressure. I also wasn't very healthy physically, and then the physical toll that I was dealing with transferred over mentally. So physically and mentally, I wasn't very healthy. I think I just wanted it so bad that I was overtrained, I think. There was just like a whole slew of things that it was like the perfect storm to just crash and burn. But I tried, I don't regret it at all. I'm very fortunate that I had the opportunity and the resources and the support to even try. So yeah, I can look back and say that I gave it a go and I just didn't work out, and that's life sometimes, right?
Unfortunately, that is part of life, yes, but it's still very hard to deal with, I can imagine, especially when you need to make that choice, which you eventually did at Namur. How was that? Because I can imagine that was a very, very tough decision to make, especially considering the effort and resources you had put into your trip in Europe.
No, not at all. The amount of anxiety I felt during that time was off the charts, and I think it wasn't appropriate for me to be there anymore, I don't think, and it definitely wasn't appropriate for me to be trying to race at that time. So I think the best decision for me was to go home and just try to reset and kind of reevaluate what I'm doing. And I think this was kind of stemming from that World Cup win. I was kind of in and out of like, okay, I have this figured out. Like I think I'm getting closer to like figuring out my why again. And then the next day it would be like, no, I have no clue what I'm doing. Like, why am I doing this? That kind of thing. And if I look back, that World Cup win was definitely, it's easy for me to see now, is definitely the turning point. And I think from then on, I was just kind of grasping at straws and trying to figure out like, how do I get back to how I felt before I won that race? And that won't make sense to everyone because everyone's journey is different, but I try my best to articulate what I was experiencing and feeling from that World Cup win, and then the next couple years after that.
So in a way, it was kind of the best and the worst day of your life
In my cycling career, yes, because after
yeah.
that, nothing was the same again for me. Yeah.
In a way, it's not a unique phenomena that you describe here, because if we look at the career of Elis Lichtley, she became Olympic champion in Rio on the Keirin on the track, very young age still. She had a very high there, but she had a very low after that as well. Basically what you just described, it was a feeling of emptiness, not knowing why I'm training anymore. She had accomplished everything she'd worked and dreamed about, so yeah, in a way it's not entirely unique either. And it's definitely important to talk about it because it's something that is often overlooked, and throughout the last years there has been more attention for it, thankfully, for that. But the mental part of the sport is very challenging as well.
Mm-hmm. No, totally. And over the years, I have tried my best to speak up. I have used my social media platform to discuss my experience and just share a bit of my mental health journey. And I think it's important, and it is scary to talk about because especially in sport when, like everyone trains super hard. So it does come down to like the mental side of it. And if you do struggle with the mental side of it, you could be seen as like weak or you don't have what it takes or whatever. But that's not true, because I think everyone at some point will experience some type of mental struggle, and it's just finding I think the main thing is finding someone or some type of team that can help you learn to navigate it, and then you can like beat the mental struggle for sure. Like it's just super hard, and again, everyone has a different journey, so it's not one size fits all, and so it's really just about taking the time to like find someone that will help you figure out what will work best for you and how to navigate it, and then just change your perspective on like, okay, I may have had this defining moment that changed the way I view my sport or view myself, but then like, how do I change my perspective to see past that and then work with like where I'm at now kind of thing. um but yeah, it's definitely been comforting to like hear about other top athlete stories that they kind of have had a similar experience to me, maybe at a little lower level, maybe at like an Olympic level, which is higher, but still it's they're experiencing the same type of thing, and it is comforting to know that I'm not the only one, and my story is not unique, very unique, right? So that's helpful.
Yeah, I agree. Every story is unique in its own way, and I guess yours is also very unique considering when you were trying to reset. I, of course, don't know the details. Maybe you could explain a bit more about that. But I can imagine that the COVID crisis, which started after that, that pandemic, that also affected you in terms of training and motivation.
I saw that your question there, and actually, I don't believe that COVID and the pandemic, in terms of motivation or like my wanting to get back towards a competitive level in the sport, had any effect, because we still went over to Europe for 3 months last season. It was a lot more to race because you guys were still holding races like under precautions, and a lot was different, like no spectators, and we all had to have the masks on, and like we had to have our papers when we checked in. It was definitely a different environment, but there was still racing, and we were still away from home for 3 months, and so I still had to train, I still had to prepare for this season, and I don't feel like at a high level in the sport, because we were able to go over to Europe, that much was very different other than like a few things. So in terms of motivation and like a disruption in the season, that didn't really happen. So I would have to say that COVID, yes, it's horrible, and like the global pandemic, and we're still experiencing the effects of it. And with some things, I don't even think like we've seen all of it yet, right? But yeah, that didn't really affect me performance or anything like that wise.
Well, that's very good to hear in a way because last year we spoke with Magali Rochette on the podcast and she told us that things were very unsure for her. She wasn't sure if there would be racing as plenty of races got cancelled. She wasn't sure if she would be allowed to come to Europe to race. It was all a rushed last minute decision. They lived from a camper van, if I recall correctly, for a couple of months. So that's certainly not ideal, but it's definitely good that it didn't affect you and that you could come with would say some fresh energy to Europe. How would that season go? Because in terms of results, it looked pretty disappointing, but that doesn't need to tell the full story.
Oh yeah. Well, no, for sure. Like, it was unknown. There were so many unknowns, like with the season, right? Like we didn't have any racing in the U.S. And again, we didn't know if we were going to go to Europe, but we still prepared like we were because at the end of the day, we were going to try. If we were allowed, we were going. So I just kind of took that mentality of like, well, yeah, there are a ton of unknowns, but we need to be prepared if we do go. So I'm just gonna think like we're going. And yes, that season was a massive, performance wise, it was a massive disappointment. For me personally, that season was a massive win because it was basically just me proving to myself. I had to show myself that like I could go over there for a whole season and be in a healthy mental state the entire time. Yes, I didn't race well at all, but I was there, I was showing up, and I was doing the best that I could in that season of my life. So again, performance wise, it sucked. Nothing to write home about, but personally, I came away with like a lot of growth and experience and knowledge about myself that I wouldn't have got otherwise. So I think in that sense, it was a massive win for me. and I became a lot more clear on my perspective and what I wanted to do going forward. And actually, in December of that trip, I had texted our team owner, Stu Thorne, and said, the 2021-22 season is going to be my last one. Like, I'm going to end in Arkansas. I'm going to be done. And then his response to me was like, I had a feeling that you were going to say that. So that was that.
I mean, there's certainly more important things in life than the cycling results. I mean, it all comes and stands with how you feel, and I mean, the results certainly don't say the entire story, which is also what I feel is overlooked because there was a article published just after the US World Cups by a big Belgian journalist who was cracking down the performances of the Americans, including yours, which I spoke up against on our Twitter account because it was clearly ignoring the mental part that also Ellen Noble experienced, and that was pretty sad to see. So I really agree that there's certainly more than just results, and that you can't go of, oh, the results were bad, so X, Y, or Z.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sticking up for us. Number one. Yeah, again, like in Belgium and the Netherlands, your cyclocross and cycling is covered so heavily that I can't imagine what it would be like to be a top athlete in the sport of cycling in Europe. Like, it's something that I can't even fathom. I like Sana Kant, and she's the one that I kind of like feel for the most, because I can't imagine what that pressure is like, because there is outside pressure and probably an enormous amount, and it's probably very hard, if next to impossible, to like tune that out. So yeah, I mean, again, like that is this, I think that's kind of like all sport, and I don't know how that changes from the journalists and the media and a lot of people outside looking in. It is all performance based, and it's super easy to, I don't know the word, judge, I guess, from the outside looking in. You don't know what that athlete is going through. You don't know if they're physically sick, if they're struggling mentally. There is such thing as bad days. Like, they are human. We're not robots. So it is like so hard for like to be at the top of your game all the time. And especially with cyclocross, it's year after year after year, there's a world championships. There's no like Olympic cycle, right? It's not a 4-year span. So every year you're just expected to be good every weekend. And that is so unbelievably hard. So the top few that are doing that, like, they're amazing, because that's you just have this window. And if you have a window that, like in my case, my career, the best 3 years of my career were amazing, but for me, that was my window. And like, fortunately, I was able to capitalize on that window and make the most of it and have a really good ride. But like, that was it, right? For me, that was my time. So for those competitors that I was fortunate enough to compete against, for them to have like this big window of success, like Marion Voss, is just, I just tip my hat to her, because that's amazing. So
I guess the critics will never disappear, and in a way, it's also the job of a journalist to be critical about results in sports. But there's difference between completely cracking down a rider or talking in a respectful way about the slightly disappointing results, because at least that's what we try to do on our podcast and social media. Is like, yes, the result today was disappointing, or yes, throughout the past couple of weeks the results haven't been there, but this could be the reason. Or when we know that something happened, we try and read as much as possible on it on the rider's social media, or even contact them if possible, so we can get a bigger picture. And like, sure, we can criticize the performances, but we always try and account for the performances and never pretend like a rider is super bad because it had one bad season or a bad race or a bad phase in the season.
no, totally. And to those super harsh critics, like, I would just say, you get out there and do it. Like, you get out there and do it, and then you come report back to me how it went. Because it's exactly what you said, is like, yes, there you can make your judgments, but then the what's the judgment behind the judgment kind of thing.
Well, you just mentioned that your plan first was to retire at the end of this season. What was your thought behind that?
Again, it kind of goes back to the thing I was just grasping at straws. I had this idea in my head that it was like it would be so wonderful and the perfect way to end my cycling chapter if I could finish it with a great performance in Arkansas on home soil at the World Championships. That was the picture perfect idea in my head. Unfortunately, my time to make the decision to be done was long overdue. Again, this goes back to the winning the World Cup in Iowa. It was just I drew it out as long as I could, hoping that something would change for me, hoping that I could feel different or find that fire and motivation within again. And I did absolutely everything in my power to figure that out and try to get that back. I tried so many different things, like with my sports psychologist, with the physical training, with meditation, like changing my perspective on outcome goals. Like I tried literally everything at my disposal to get that fire back, and I couldn't. Like, and it's at the end of the day, it's if you don't have it, you don't have it, and I couldn't force it, and it's really unfortunate, and it still bums me out and makes me emotional because I didn't want to feel that way, right? And I tried so hard not to because I love the sport. I love cycling. I think it's so awesome, especially cyclocross, but I just didn't want to race anymore. So I just didn't want to be competitive and like give absolutely everything I had to it anymore. So I just decided that I could either stop in Arkansas or I could draw it out for another 3 months, but that wouldn't get me anywhere good. So I just stopped, and I was brave enough to make that decision there, and it was the hardest decision of my life, and like a super emotional couple days. Like definitely felt like I was like had lost like a loved one or broke up with someone or something. Like it was horrible feeling. Again, because I didn't want to like leave my team or let my team down. But I think in the end, I had to be brave enough to make the decision that was best for me. And making that decision was also best for the team. So I'm proud of myself for like having the courage to do that, because it's definitely wasn't great and it wasn't the way I wanted to end it, but it needed to happen. And after I made that decision, I felt like this massive sense of relief, like after I got over the emotional side of it, and I knew in my heart that that was the right thing to do. And what are we, like a week or two out from that? I'm great. Like, yeah, I'll always be kind of bummed about it, but I can look back and be like, I had a great cycling career. I met so many wonderful people. I reached the top of the sport, like basically. And yeah, it was just a wonderful journey, and I can look back and be proud and excited that I had the opportunity to do that. And it was really fun, not funny, but it was really interesting is a better word, to see like 2 days after I think I made my announcement, my dad had texted me a screenshot of Sophie DeBoer's Instagram, and she had also decided to move on. And if I compare them, they are eerily similar because she started the season, she was training wicked hard, like throughout the spring and summer, leading up to the season. She had bought her ticket for America to do the World Cups. I had bought my ticket. I was actually supposed to leave in 30 minutes to come to Europe today for like 5 weeks or something. And just she was also brave enough to just say, no, I need to do this for myself because this is the best decision and the healthiest decision. And I really admire her for that as well. So it takes a lot of courage to do that. So
I guess we conclude that you have no regrets and can look back upon a very good career, even though some things didn't work out the way you hoped they worked out.
yes, I can confidently say that. Yes. Mm-hmm. It was not a lack of trying.
And now, what's next for you? Do you already have any plans, or are you taking it easy for the well-being?
Yes. So actually, my husband and I in 2017, we started our little business. It's called Peakview Properties, and we have 3 short-term rental properties that are permitted through the city, but they're listed on Airbnb. So we just host like vacationers or traveling nurses, and we do pretty well with that. And then also I'm going to start working with KX3 Coaching Company, which is Kristen Armstrong's coaching company, and I hope to coach junior women through that program. And then just basic, I took part in a webinar with the Cyclist Alliance that Roos and Iris Slappendell and Gracie Elvin kind of run, and that was super informative and really nice to be a part of that, because it was just learning from women who raced at a professional level across all disciplines in cycling and then transferred over to work in the industry. So that was awesome. And yeah, I'm basically just keeping all options open, never saying no to any opportunities really, and just kind of looking forward to starting that next chapter and see what else is out there. But yeah, I think the properties is a good transition thing, because it's keeping us busy and helping us make a living. But then I'd also like to definitely stay in the sport of cycling in some shape or form, because again, I do still really love it, and I'm passionate about it, and I'd like to stay involved. So yeah.
Yeah, that definitely sounds fun. There's so many fun things around cycling, even if you're not riding yourself.
Totally, yes. It's a no lack of things to do in the industry. So
Well, then I think we've covered a pretty impressive career here, and good to hear that you're going to be doing things that you enjoy now. Thank you so much for coming on today.
thank you very much for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
And then for our listeners, some additional information. The next podcast will be our preview podcast for the World Cup in Overijse of this Sunday, and you can expect that coming out on Friday. And of course, also a preview podcast for the Koppenberg coming out very soon. Thanks everyone for listening, and make sure to share it with anyone who you think is interested, and I'll catch you guys soon. Goodbye.